Hey, yo, is this thing on? All right, good. All right, let's make sure the levels are good. Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. All right, boom, here we go. My name is Kaya Nyami Shivers. Welcome to Ark Republic. I am coming to you on a slightly different channel, and it is just strictly audio. That is because this is part of what I call Ark Republic 5.0. What is Ark Republic 5.0? Ark Republic 5.0 is us relaunching ourselves, going back into the lab, figuring out what works, what we want to keep, what we want to enhance, and what we need to let go. There is a Yoruba proverb that says, you must reinitiate self into yourself. And so that's what we have done. And so as a result of that, we have added some really dope programming and some future projects. 2 of those projects are audio podcasts. And so podcasts actually were the original version audio, just because, as folk do, they'll take a medium and they'll make it their own. They'll remix it. Today, a lot of podcasts are visual, and they really are shows, often on YouTube, Vimeo, and so on and so forth. But the original podcasts were audio podcasts, which basically was taken from radio. So we're going back. How far back? Way back. We're taking it back to the old school, and we are getting into some serious topics. And we want to do it in a way where you just hear us and you can be able to concentrate on the words that are coming out of our mouths. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you 2 of the podcasters. Amanda Agyei, who is across the pond in London, and Tashiana Scott Cochran, who I have been rolling with for over 2 decades, and she is a homegirl. She's from California. Welcome. I appreciate y'all for coming. I think first things first is to see how y'all feeling today.
Doing well, thank you.
I am well.
I want to first get into Amanda. Amanda, tell us about your podcast, the concept behind it, how you came up with it.
Yeah, my name is Amanda Agyei. I'm an East Londoner. I am a Ghanaian, and I've been working in education and educational development for years now. And I lived in Italy for too many years, 8 years about. And the idea for this podcast has been brewing for years and years, like talking to, just meeting people in Italy, in the UK, in Oman, all over the place, and them having really interesting stories, doing really interesting projects, and thinking more people need to hear this because the beginnings are sometimes, moneyed, and other times they're really not. And it's just people having an idea and really trying to make it work regardless of their circumstances. And I love platforming and just talking to people like this. So really, I just want to interview people doing really interesting stuff and hope down the line that different people listening can connect and start doing and collaborating and asking for advice, all of that. I just really like the idea of community through conversation.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We're going to definitely double back and get more into the nuts and bolts of Intermezzo. But now we're going to direct our attention to Tashiana Scott Cochran. Once again, thank you for joining us. Could you please tell us about your podcast? What's the name of it? And what is the idea behind it?
The podcast is entitled Bookends and Liner Notes. And what made me start it is my love for books, music, and the library. It is the perfect marriage or threesome for all of those things. It's perfect.
A threesome?
A threesome in the most healthy way.
You have been in Atlanta too long, Tashiana, but salute. I am not hating. I'm not participating, but I'm definitely not hating.
Maybe so. Maybe some of the streets has rubbed off on me, but in the best way possible. It is the perfect juxtaposition of the 3 entities. I could say it that way.
Either or, it doesn't matter. It still makes for really good conversation. But what you said actually is an idea that I really look forward to you exploring in the books and the musical projects that you select is sexuality. If we're talking about books, and Tashiana, you opened me up to the world of Toni Morrison in a way that I had never experienced. But Toni Morrison, the ancestor now, did really excellent work in exploring Black women's sexuality and Black women's understandings and participation in life from different ability and lenses. However, before we get into that deeply, for the youngins who are listening, the Gen Zs and those younger or the younger millennials, maybe a lot of people don't know what a liner note is. What is a liner note?
A liner note is what is written inside of an album. It explains how a song is written or why a song is written, and it kind of goes in depth. And once upon a time, the liner notes were the packaging inside of the album. It was kind of like a clear tissue paper, but it had the writing on it, so it protected the album, but it gave you all this information about the album. And those of the children that may not know what an album is, I'm sure their parents might, but that's the record player. Before the record players were, they're now they're coming back. They're having a resurgence. You put your records in an area for safekeeping because you didn't want to scratch your records, and the liner notes protected the records also. So it had a dual purpose.
Adding to what you were saying, Tashiana, I want to say that the last time that I vividly remember liner notes is when we had CDs. So there were still liner notes in that version of musical projects. Now they call them musical projects. We used to call them rap. Hold up, let me back up. Well, we had tapes, we had first albums, then we had, well, honestly, to be totally honest, before there were albums, people actually purchased compositions. They would purchase the music and then play it themselves. Then you have records, and then you have the 8-track, and then you have the cassette tapes, which are smaller versions. Then you have the CDs. All of these had these different liner notes, and as an entertainment journalist and reporter, I would always read the liner notes because it gave you more insight in terms of who worked on the project. Sometimes there was messages from the musicians themselves that went deeper than shout outs. And so it really became, honestly, a story to the backstory or the production aspect. And I really would look forward to the liner notes on hip hop albums because, there wasn't the Twitter and the TikTok and all these things. And sometimes this is where we got some of the information from folk and how they felt. I can vividly remember reading the liner notes or a semblance of it when Erykah Badu's project came out. It was her second album. It was after she broke up with Andre 3000. I forgot the name of the album, but I remember her apologizing because at the last minute she changed the order of her words. But anyway, I could go on and on. Could you please let me know or let the audience know about Bookends, right? So I jokingly always refer to the library as that dinosaur of a building to my students because a lot of them don't go in there. If they do go in there, they might go in there for a snack, but I encourage them to always use the library. Librarians are such a dope resource. But before I get ahead of myself, please explain what Bookends are.
So when you have a library where you want to keep your books upright, you start them from a certain point and you have an ending point, and you can move your bookends as you need to add or subtract a book, but they can come in different forms. They can get artsy, but it's just a level of sophistication. If you wish to have a library, it's just a part of it.
I want to direct this next question back to Amanda. Amanda, when we met several years ago, we would have these very interesting conversations, but often in these conversations, there had to be what I would call points of clarity. Like, what does that mean? Or what does that saying mean? Or what does that saying mean? Because here I am, a sister from the US. I'm a Black sister from the US. You are a sister from London, East London, by way of your parentage from Ghana. And so in these moments of clarity, I think it speaks volumes to how we think about or think through or may not try to understand how does one experience life in this skin that we're in other parts of the world. This is why I think Intermezzo is so very necessary, because it opens the conversation up that we've been having across the waters and across routes and borders. but it opens it up to me in a way that is so much more intimate. So can you please like give us more information of why do you think a podcast like Intermezzo is so important right now at this time?
So with intermezzo or intermezzo, as you say if you're Italian, but it's I think the meaning in both languages is pretty much the same. It means interlude, no? So that space in between where maybe there's not understanding, maybe you're going on a bit of a break. And I think living in Italy was important because it was a bit of a pause from my other experience of being a Black Brit to being a Black person in Italy. No, and I think with all the connections that I've made, just either casually or via work or just having really good conversations with people at parties, whatever it is, it's that space in between where you can connect. And I think maybe there are some misconceptions. Maybe racism doesn't exist in Europe, or it's worse here and worse there, or well, the real racism is in America. You should be grateful that we're not doing X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of preconceptions that are fueled by sometimes institutions, sometimes in education, sometimes the things they do tell you and don't tell you. For example, in the UK, we study a lot about American history, slavery, and all of these dire, horrible situations, but they don't talk about colonialism. They don't talk about what they did in Ghana. They don't talk about what the Italians did in Somalia and Eritrea and Ethiopia. No one talks about it. So oftentimes in Europe, the scapegoat is America. Well, look at what they're doing over there. Let's study that rather than looking at themselves. So I think through conversations with different people about their experiences and also how they're making things work for them, regardless of very difficult situations here, I hope that it will help people get a better understanding of different diasporic communities, but also understand that connections need to be made for things to get better generally.
I am so happy that you burst a bubble about the idea of race relations in Europe. In the United States, a lot of Black people are like, I'm going to go to Europe because it's so much better. You live much better to be a Black person. And there is racism throughout the world, and there definitely is racism in Europe. My experience in Italy, in particular, the white Italian refused to talk about the racism in the country, and they would say something like, "Oh, in Italy, racism is illegal. We don't talk about that. It's illegal in the United States too, as well." But I also wanted to also point to where this idea for a Black American mind, thinking that it's better in Europe. This is coming from the World War's soldiers and actually elite creative people moving to Europe and being catered to and having this experience that the typical Black person in Europe does not have.
Again, this is a classic example of the scapegoat, right? And also kind of like Black Americans or Asian Americans or whatever American is being a novelty, right? So sometimes Americans do go there and they're fawned over or like really, really hypersexualized, which is massively gross. But they have a niche experience, right? But speak to a Black Italian that's actually being real with you. Speak to the Pakistani Italian. Speak to the Asian British person, and if they want to get real with you seriously, they will tell you exactly how bad it is. But it's not publicized abroad, and also cultures are different, right? Because we're actually a very conservative country in the UK. It's not, you're not supposed to really talk about it, and those who do get isolated sometimes. And I think that's for me, like, again, moving from the UK to Italy, I needed a break from that. I was suffocating, and myself, I was the novelty oftentimes in Italy. And to be honest, sometimes it was good because you needed that break, you know, not to be constantly attacked, but they do put you in a weird hierarchy. Because you're British, it's a bit different. So you're not getting treated like maybe someone else who was born and raised there, but it's all insidious. It's all awful. Yeah, there are things I can tell you where statistically, we in the UK imprison Black people more than in America. But like we're talking about per capita, and that island is tiny, and we're about 3%. But it's not something that is going to be talked about. We'll focus on American slavery and not how Britain demolished cultures all over the continent and enslaved people in their own countries. We're not going to do that. We're not going to talk about partition. in India. So it's all I just think Europe in general is really good at PR.
This, you just spoke to like the true historian in me. I could just listen and listen and listen and take notes. Wow.
And especially in moments, Amanda, to your point, in terms of being really great PR, it happens here in the United States, but just keeping that laser focus in Europe, specifically in the UK, especially in moments of uncomfortability, you lean back on this falsehood of identity and protocol and properness that is not extended to the folk of color in the region. But I'm so glad you talked about this hierarchy when you are coming to Europe and you already have this celebrity in the US, like a Baldwin or a Josephine Baker. And so people are going to give you the red carpet, right? Not a regular or just an average person or looking average. I tell this story often when people ask me, what's your experience in Italy? One of the things that was a frequent experience for me is, because it happened almost daily, is that when I met an Italian who did not know me, and if you go to Italy, you stay there, it's everybody gets to know you, right? But my husband and I were the only Black couple living in the area where we were living. Anywho, when I first met a white Italian in particular, because the Black people knew who was what and what was, Black people knew I was not African. Maybe they might have thought I was Caribbean, but more so than likely, we read each other. They knew I was probably American or something like that. Well, to white Italians, I initially read as African, and then specifically West African and Nigerian. So I would get kind of like this posture of like, what do you want? Are you going to come beg me for money? Or because I was a woman, there would perhaps and sometimes be some type of sexual proposition. But going back to this hierarchy, it's something, or the hierarchy in Europe is something I never experienced, because once I began to speak and they heard my American accent, it's like, aha, oh, okay. Now I can have a great conversation with you. Oh, and then they found out I was a professor, elevated the game. And then I told them where I worked. I worked on the hill, Villa La Pietra. It was even uber impressive because a lot of Florentines didn't even have access to that area. Definitely not the campus. So it was a status or a hierarchy that I will never experience in the United States, definitely as the US is now, and even just how the US deals with education. But I'm glad you brought those points up. But just to hone back in on this question, because I think it's important for you to answer, Amanda, is why is Intermezzo, right? Why is this an important podcast right now?
I think after the pandemic, I included myself, people left their jobs, people reassessed what they wanted to do, people really took a looking glass into their lives, and just general reassessment. And I think what I would like, I don't know if it will happen, but what I would like is the podcast to act as sustenance for people, almost just through people talking about themselves, how they got to where they've gotten to. Like people, because there's a person that I interviewed who started their business during the pandemic, and she was in corporate. She was in the corporate world in Italy beforehand. She's Ethiopian, has lived back and forth, but has lived in Italy for years. And everybody and their mothers told her that she couldn't start it, that she has no experience in it, and she just quit. And she also quit while she had a permanent contract, which is like gold dust in Italy. In fact, I did the same thing and everyone told me I was crazy. And she's making it work and making amazing connections. And she's pretty much doing it, a lot of it on her own, but also with making amazing collaborations with people. And I want people to hear her. Maybe they're in the same role or in a similar situation and think, no, actually, I can, with a little bit of structure, I can quit my job and do what I want, because life is too short. And then there are also people that hopefully I'll be speaking to her tomorrow. There are people that I want to interview who are also maybe in the fashion world, but are really far ahead. Like you can Google them and they'll be on Vogue, but you hear how they got there. And it's interesting because it's actually not far off from how many people start. So what I would love is to build connections, to have conversations, and for people to reach out. If you hear something and it piques your interest, contact the electronic artist, contact the poet who lives in Palermo, make proper connection, so we can kind of understand that there's enough space for everyone.
Looking forward to those conversations, Amanda. I'm going to turn the mic to Tashiana. For me, the sexiest date or one of the most engaging dates that I have are in bookstores. I love books. I love the smell of books. I love the silence of books. I like the pages turning. There, it just does something to me, but they do not read, right? So my first question is that why, what made you become a librarian, and how do you navigate this, especially in a time right now, the US, where they are re-banning books?
I was 8 years old, and I was a kid who first introduction to public school was really a series of being bullied, like horribly. And the library became my safe haven. And so the words and the books and the smells and the card catalog became places that I felt secure in because I didn't fit in with the other kids because of my cerebral palsy. I was just like, they didn't, I was teased because of it. And the librarian kind of took me under her wing and said, here, you stay here. And I just found comfort in that place. And so that was my impetus for that lifelong dream.
You just don't know how much your story resonated with me, Tashiana. The library was an oasis for myself and my siblings as well. I come from a big family, 6 children. My mother couldn't buy all those books. She was a public school, high school teacher. My father was a truck driver, so they were thugging it out in Los Angeles. But my mother believed in literacy. She believed in education. And she also, to this day, loves the library. She rarely buys a book. She utilizes what she calls her tax-paying dollars. So every summer and throughout the school year, we would go to the library for the programmings. So now we are in 2022. Could you give people an idea of how the library has changed and what does it look like right now?
The library space now, especially public libraries, services people who are unsheltered, who have mental instabilities, who are hurting. Sometimes they come in and they are bleeding. We have people who deal with crisis management. We are mandated by the state for human trafficking. Like there are things that the public library has to service that I didn't necessarily know because they don't talk about this in library school. We just kind of go through the process like a conveyor. You get your degree and you're out in the world. But in the public library, what we do is we meet needs where people are. And if that means you don't have proper hygiene, we give you present a card if you have it, and that's something you get downstairs from circulation, and you quietly, give us the card and we give you a hygiene kit. Once those are gone, you have to reorder them, and that process has to, continues. But what I found interesting was when it's really hot outside and people are unhoused, the it's on the news that you can go to a warming center or a cooling shelter, but they don't talk about the things like what if the library's air conditioning is broken because the building is old and dilapidated. So there are things that I'm finding out in the trenches are that create infrastructure issues that further impact these people that need these services most.
You talked about trafficking, as in human trafficking.
Yes.
Do you get training? How does that happen?
Well, I am new still. So what we get is this video, and you like sit for 2 hours and you take this online course that talks about human trafficking in the library and signs to spot outward just red flags and signals. But yes, we are court mandated reporters. And if we see something, we are required to say something. If we feel anything, we are required to say something.
That's incredibly intense. Are you paid enough for that? Not to be crass, but that's really serious work.
Actually, I'm paid way more than I thought I would be for a part-time position. And at this point, my immediate supervisor kind of every time we're on the desk together, she's like, hey, let me holler at you. As soon as we get a full-time position, you in there because you deserve it. you are my sunshine. I'm like, I don't even know about that, but I do my job to the best of my ability. She's like, yeah, but you make this place better and you don't even realize it because you genuinely want to be here. So for what it's worth, yeah, it's a pretty decent part-time job.
Amanda, how does the libraries in the US differ from those in the UK?
I wouldn't say it's a very working class space. I don't think it's encouraged in working class communities or in schools to necessarily go. You've got individual families that may attend, but what you usually find is a lot of families that come from other places or whose parents come from other places that will encourage it because maybe they had education in their country, but it's not necessarily a very, very working class space. And also, they're closing down a lot of libraries. The first thing that our current government and our past governments have done is close down libraries, and they're needed because they do provide things that maybe you can't find easily in some working class communities. You can use the toilets freely. Maybe if it's raining, you can go inside, and it's free, and no one's going to maybe bother you for a little while. So yeah, a lot of libraries are closing down. It's quite sad to see, actually.
I wanted to ask Amanda, you said that the libraries are closing down. Is it because of budgeting issues or is it because of the fact that there is knowledge and information that could change the course of one's existence if you are empowered to go and receive the information? Is that a part of a push to kind of deconstruct the library space in the UK? I would just want to know your opinion on that.
I think I would say that it's a wider push to shut down a lot of spaces in working class communities, right? So we had a lot of youth clubs growing up, especially like all over the UK actually, but especially in bigger cities. And that is where I went to play pool and to hang out with friends. And basically, it stops you from being on the streets or on roads, as we would say in London. It stops you from being on the street. Now they close down the youth clubs. They are closing down libraries, closing down all of these public spaces that libraries maybe weren't as frequented, but they were still available. And
Mm-hmm.
youth clubs were very frequented. They close them down, then what happens? Crime rises. And then who are the culprits? Apparently, it's either the white working class or the black person here or the Asian family here, and they'll make it about race. And then it pushes forward a different kind of agenda, which is awful. But really, if you have more youth clubs, you allow the libraries to stay open, there are less issues. But I don't understand why they what I do. I feel like they don't want different communities to feel empowered, and therefore they close things down and they blame it on an inherent violence in certain demographics rather than a lack of services.
Wow, Amanda, there is so much overlapping between what you're describing in the UK and what has been happening in the US since roughly around the 70s. Uh, the erosion and the defunding of libraries in the United States, there's the recreational spaces, the parks, the community centers that you're talking about. And it's happening during a time, so I'm talking about around 1970s, where you have you have this massive migration of African Americans coming out of the South or the agrarian South to the cities in the Northeast, the Midwest, and the West in order to have better educational and economic opportunities. And what happens is that to remove all of those institutions that help develop communities, so then black folk who are coming trying to enfranchise themselves and be full citizens, those opportunities or the babies that are coming up are removed. The overlapping is absolutely insane. I just also want to add, because it also made me think of when you were talking about the libraries being an elite space. The United States, in attempting to carve out its identity away from the British after the Revolutionary War, Benjamin Franklin has this idea or this thesis about if you allow the whole population, if you promote literacy and push literacy, then you will have a progressive, productive population in a faster time. Because at this time, the only people who really had that type of access were rich, wealthy, upper class, maybe middle class, white men. So women were allowed the ability to read too. However, at this same time that's going on, it was illegal for an enslaved person and a pseudo black free person to read. And definitely, if you were enslaved and you were caught reading or writing, then the consequences could possibly mean death. So it's really interesting how what you're talking about, Amanda, and what Tashiana is talking about, that there will be overlappings and what that looks like. We are all looking forward to that. So I'm going to ask this next question is that we as the audience, what should we be expecting from the podcast?
I want the listeners to go on the journey with me to dig deeper into why we listen to what we listen to and why we read what we read. Because oftentimes, the way that I see it, the book and the music are, they lead us somewhere. They're like our cardinal directions, our north, south, east, and west. We can bookmark our lives as to what we were listening to or what we are reading, or the lack thereof. So if it's the latter, then that means we need to do more. We need to be willing to go to these uncomfortable spaces. And in going to the uncomfortable spaces, I think we will be made better as a people. So that is my hope for the podcast, to move undaunted through some uncomfortable things in hopes to grow.
I think my hope
Yes.
is that there'll be different people listening in the US that will understand that their experience is actually quite similar to the business owner that I interviewed, who is Ethiopian and Italian, or uh, the mixed race Asian woman who's also Italian but now lives in London and is doing amazing stuff, and that there are actually more connections than people would assume, because I think a lot of the time Europe is kind of weirdly made out as the old country and weirdly idyllic also. Um, but actually, there are a lot of parallels, and I think from people telling their stories and how they've gotten to where they are, if they're in the beginning of their career or being really successful, I hope that it will kind of bring more people together and hopefully inspire people to just start doing the things they want to do.
I am so very excited about these two podcasts, Amanda Agyei, Intermezzo, and Tashiana Scott Cochran with um, bookends and liner notes. For those who are listening, please take this journey with us on the mothership. We are all creatives in this piece, so we are going to evolve, and I know you are going to fall in love with these two. I already have, and I look forward to speaking and listening and engaging and learning. So this is Ark Republic in an audio podcast. I can't believe it. We are getting down and dirty again. All right, Amanda and Tashiana, good luck, and look forward to seeing how you grow. Or I should say, glow. We are dedicating each Thursday to podcast. You can check out Amanda Agyei's Intermezzo every second Thursday of the month, and Tashiana Scott Cochran's Bookends and Liner Notes every fourth Thursday of the month.